Good evening, and welcome. Find a comfortable position. Let the weight of your body settle. Feel the gentle pull of gravity, a constant, silent companion in the dark. There is no need to rush here. There is only the stillness of the room around you and the sound of my voice. We are often taught to fear the dark, to fear the things we cannot see. But the true masters of fear know that sight is a distraction. The most profound terrors are not seen, but heard. They arrive on the edge of pairing, in the spaces between sounds, in the moments when you think you are completely and utterly alone. For 7 years, Ilias Thorne was a refugee. His asylum was a fortress of noise, built in the heart of a city that never slept. His job as a librarian was a carefully chosen post on the battlements of that fortress. The library was not a quiet place, not to him. It was a place of soft, constant, life-affirming sound. The whisper of turning pages, the rustle of clothing, the gentle coughs and cleared throats of patrons, the distant, ever-present rumble of traffic filtering through old glass. These were the sounds of humanity, a chaotic, meaningless, and beautiful shield against the structured, intelligent silence that haunted him. He had not known a moment of true quiet since he fled the Blackwood house. His small apartment was a cacophony of competing frequencies. Fans, white noise generators, old radios tuned to static. Even a recording of a bustling train station he played on a loop. Sleep was a managed drowning in sound, a nightly submersion designed to leave no space for anything else to enter. He had become a connoisseur of clamor, the inverse of the man he once was. The archivist of decay was now the curator of commotion. He thought he was safe. He was wrong. The past does not stay buried. It merely changes the way it speaks. It began with a book. An old, leather-bound volume returned to the library after being checked out for 50 years. It was left on his cart, a strange, anonymous donation. There was no title on its spine, no markings on its dark, cracked cover. Elias, his curiosity, a ghost limb that still sometimes ached, took it back to his small office. Inside, the pages were filled with a spidery, archaic script, detailing geological surveys of cave systems and abandoned mines. It was dry, technical, put reading, the kind of text that would lull most to sleep. But as Elias turned the pages, a fine, dark powder dusted his fingers. Salt, he lifted the book to his nose. It smelled of deep earth, of minerals, and of something else. A profound, sterile stillness. Tucked into the back of the book was a modern, high-resolution photograph. It showed a vast cavern, its walls, floor, and ceiling a glittering, crystalline black. The formations were not the chaotic spikes of a natural cave. They were smooth, geometric, almost polished, as if the cavern had been carved by an intelligence that despised rough edges. In the center of the cavern stood a single piece of modern equipment, a tripod bearing a multi-directional microphone, almost identical to the ones Elias had used. On the back of the photograph, a single sentence was typed. It has learned to echo. Elias felt the floor tilt beneath him. The air in his small, noisy office suddenly thinned. He could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, the whir of his personal fan. The city outside, but beneath it all. For the first time in 7 years, he felt the presence of its opposite. The silence was testing the walls of his fortress. That night his defenses failed. The layers of white noise seemed to stretch, to become porous. In the gaps between the static, in the briefest of lulls, he heard it. It was not the slow, organic breathing of the Blackwood house. It was something new. It was a perfect crystalline echo of his own name, Elias. The voice was his own, but stripped of all warmth, all life. It was a recording made of ice. He sat bolt upright in bed, his heart a frantic drum against the carefully constructed wall of sound. The echo came again, clearer this time, seeming to emanate not from the room, but from inside his own skull. Elias, the salt remembers. The carefully managed chaos of his life had been breached. He knew with the certainty of a condemned man that he could not simply add another fan, another layer of noise. This was not an attack he could block. It was a summons. 2 days later, a man was waiting for him outside the library. He was old, dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored gray suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was a roadmap of faint scars and weary patience. He introduced himself only as Mr. Jones. "You've been a difficult man to approach, Mr. Thorne," Jones said, his voice low and calm, yet carrying an authority that cut through the street noise effortlessly. "You've built quite the shell. Pour yourself." "I don't know who you are," Elias said, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. "I represent a foundation," Jones said, falling into step beside him. "The foundation for a historical phenomena. We study events that fall outside the conventional narrative of history and science. Events like the one you participated in at the Blackwood house." Elias stopped, his blood running cold. "I didn't participate in anything. I recorded a sound." "You did more than that," Jones said, his eyes holding Elias's with an unnerving intensity. "You communicated with it. You gave it a name, in a sense, the pleroma, and in doing so, you created a resonance, a sympathetic vibration. It knows you, Mr. Thorne, and now so do we." Jones explained that his foundation had been monitoring the Blackwood house for decades, long before Elias had arrived. They knew about Alistair Blackwood, his theories, his disappearance. They treated it not as a haunting, but as a stable, localized anomaly, a predator that was content to wait in its lair. "But something has changed," Jones continued, handing Elias a thin file. 6 months ago, a new anomaly appeared. Different signature, different location, but with a terrifyingly similar structure. An abandoned salt mine in western Poland. Krystowa Sisia, the crystal silent. Elias opened the file. Inside were geological maps, historical records, and the same photograph from the book. "The mine exhibits a unique property," Jones said. It doesn't just absorb sound, it records it, and it plays it back. But the fidelity is malevolent. It strips the life from the recording. It creates perfect, dead echoes. We sent a preliminary team in. We lost them, but not before they sent back one final, clear transmission. Jones paused, his gaze unwavering. It was a recording of their own voices, speaking in unison. They said, "The silence has a new name. It calls itself Elias." Elias felt a wave of nausea. This was his fault. His conversation with the pleroma, his act of naming it, had somehow seeded another instance of it. He had not just fled a monster. He had, in some unknowable way, become its father. "What do you want from me?" Elias whispered, the words tasting like ash. "The anomaly in the mine is active. It's growing. Unlike the Blackwood entity, it is not content to wait. It is learning, expanding. We believe it is trying to replicate the conditions of the antechamber on a massive scale. We have developed a countermeasure, a device that generates what our engineers call chaotic sound, not just noise, but a sonic event with no patterns, no rhythm, no possibility of being echoed or recorded. A signal that is, in theory, poison to such an entity. But we need someone to deliver it to the heart of the mind. Someone who understands the enemy. Someone whose name it is already calling. It was not a request. It was a diagnosis. Elias was the only one with the antibodies, the only one who had faced the silence and survived. His life of running was over. The only path forward was back into the quiet. The journey to Poland was a study in contrasts. Elias flew on a private jet provided by the Foundation. The roar of its engines, a comforting blanket. He was accompanied by Jones and a young, brilliant, and deeply skeptical acoustical engineer named Lena Petrova. Lena was the designer of the countermeasure device, which she called the nullifier. She saw the phenomenon in purely scientific terms, a complex quantum state feedback loop, a geological freak of nature. She dismissed Ilias's talk of a conscious, malevolent entity as trauma-induced psychosis. "Sound is energy, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice crisp, as they reviewed the schematics on a laptop. "It follows rules. This entity is simply a set of environmental conditions we don't yet understand. The nullifier will disrupt the feedback loop. It will turn it off. It's an engineering problem, not an exorcism." Elias didn't argue. He just watched the clouds below, feeling the familiar, oppressive weight of the silence gathering ahead of them. A storm system on a metaphysical weather map. The entrance to the Christowo-Sisha mine was a dark maw in the side of a desolate, windswept hill. The air was cold and smelled of salt and ozone. The Foundation had set up a small, temporary base camp, a bubble of light and noise against the encroaching stillness. The silence here was different from that of the Blackwood woods. It was not a heavy, breathing silence. It was a sharp, sterile, cutting silence. A silence that felt like a razor's edge. Sounds did not carry. They simply ceased to be, sliced out of existence the moment they left your lips. Elias, Lena, and a small security team led by the stoic Mr. Jones prepared for their descent. They wore insulated gear and carried powerful headlamps. The nullifier was a heavy, cylindrical device that Elias carried on his back. It was inert, its power source kept separate for safety. As they stood at the mine's entrance, Lena took a baseline reading with a handheld sensor. She frowned. "That's odd," she muttered. "I'm reading trace amounts of argon and xenon. Gas. They shouldn't be here. And the ambient temperature is 3 degrees Celsius below the geological norm. It's like something is actively cooling the air. It knows we're here," Elias said softly. "It's making the space comfortable for itself." They stepped across the threshold, and the world changed. The faint whisper of the wind, the hum of the camp's generator, the crunch of their own boots on the gravelet all vanished. The silence that fell upon them was absolute, a physical pressure that made their ears pop. They were inside the bell jar. Their headlamps cut sharp, clear tunnels of light through the oppressive dark. The walls of the mine were not rough-hewn rock, but smooth, black salt crystal, veined with streaks of silver and gray. The air was so dry it felt like it was pulling the moisture from their lungs. The only sounds were the ones they made themselves, the whisper of their insulated clothing, the thud of their hearts, the sound of their own breathing, shockingly loud in the stillness. They walked for what felt like hours, descending deeper and deeper into the earth. The mine was a labyrinth of perfectly carved tunnels and archways, the geometry too precise, too deliberate for human hands. It felt like walking through the fossilized arteries of some immense, long-dead creature. The first echo happened an hour. In one of the security men, a young man named Corporal Davis, stumbled, letting out a sharp grunt of surprise. The sound died instantly. A few seconds later, it came back, grunt. It was a perfect replica of the sound, but flat, dead. It came from all around them, and from nowhere at all. Davis froze, his eyes wide in his beam of light. "What was that?" "It's the resonance," Lena said, her voice tight, trying to sound clinical. "The crystalline structure must be creating a complex delay effect." "It's a recording," Elias corrected her quietly. "It's listening." They pushed on, the silence now laced with a new tension. They were being observed. Every sound. They made a cough, a scuff of a boot. A whispered word was captured and played back moments later, a dead, mocking imitation. The mine was building a sonic vocabulary of their presence. Then the echoes began to change. They started to overlap, to blend. A cough would be played back, followed by the scuff of a boot, then a whispered word, all strung together into a meaningless, disjointed sentence of sound. It was learning to edit. They reached a vast, circular chamber. In the center, the previous team's equipment stood exactly as it had in the photograph, covered in a fine layer of black salt dust. Their abandoned supplies were neatly stacked. Against one wall, there was no sign of a struggle, no sign of the team themselves. Lena moved to the microphone, her own instruments in hand. "The energy readings are off the charts," she breathed, her skepticism now a distant memory. The entire chamber is vibrating at a subharmonic frequency, but there's no power source. It's generating its own energy. It's impossible. As she spoke, the mine echoed her words. But it didn't just echo the sound. It echoed the thought. Impossible. The whisper came, not in Lena's voice, but in a cold, internal whisper that bypassed their ears entirely. It was the pure concept of impossibility, stripped of human inflection. Lena staggered back, her hand flying to her head. "Did you?" "We heard it," Jones said, his grim face betraying a flicker of fear. The entity was evolving. It was no longer just mimicking sound. It was learning to mimic meaning. It began to play with them. It started with the echoes of their footsteps. At first, the rhythm was perfect. Then, a subtle delay was introduced. An extra footstep would sound just behind them. A step would be missed, creating a jarring, syncopated rhythm that was deeply unsettling. It was a simple thing, but it was a direct assault on their senses, a quiet way of telling them that the very laws of reality were different here. Then came the voices, began to use their own voices against them, but not just the sounds they had made in the mine. It was delving deeper. Jones, the stoic leader, suddenly stopped, his head cocked. "My wife," he whispered. "I can hear my wife." The mine whispered back in the voice of a woman Elias had never heard. "Why did you leave me alone, David?" It was so cold at the end. Jones paled, his composure shattering. "She died 10 years ago," he choked out. The mine had reached into his memory and weaponized his grief. It was not just an echo. It was a parasite of the soul. It turned on Lena next. It did not use voices. It used equations. It whispered complex quantum formulas in her mind, theorems she had spent her life trying to solve. But there was always a flaw, a single, elegant, maddening error in the logic that she couldn't quite grasp. It was offering her the universe, but always pulling it just out of reach. A perfect intellectual torment. It saved its most intimate attack for Elias. It did not use grief or ambition. It used the one thing he feared most. It used the sound. Bomo of the Blackwood house. Faintly at first. Then, growing stronger, he heard it. The slow, deep, rhythmic breathing. The sound that had driven him into exile. It was here, miles under the earth, in a cave of salt. The two entities were communicating. Or, perhaps, they were the same entity, two mouths of the same silent beast. "You ran," the Pleroma's voice hissed in his mind, a chorus of dry, dusty whispers. "But we are in you, in the quiet of your blood, in the space between your thoughts. You cannot run from what you are made of." And then a new voice joined the chorus, a voice that broke what was left of his sanity. It was Aris's voice, his sister's voice, from the nightmare he had tried so hard to forget. "It's so beautiful here, Elias," she whispered, her voice filled with an ecstatic peace. "There's no noise, no pain, just the pattern. You should have stayed. You should have listened." Elias screamed, a raw animal sound of pure agony. The sound was swallowed by the mine, and then played back, a dead, hollow cry that mocked his pain. "That's enough," Jones roared, recovering himself. "Petrova the nullifier. Now." Lena, shaking, her face streaked with tears of frustration, scrambled to the device on Ilias's back. She pulled a heavy cable from it and attached a circular power core from her pack. "It needs to be activated at the focal point," she yelled, her voice strained. "The central cavern, where the energy readings are highest." They ran their footsteps, a chaotic, stumbling rhythm against the mine's mocking, ordered echoes. They followed the main tunnel deeper, the air growing colder, the black salt on the walls seeming to pulse with a faint, internal light. They burst into the final chamber and stopped dead. It was a perfect sphere, 50 feet high, its walls a flawless, unbroken surface of polished black salt. The geometry was breathtaking and utterly alien. There was no dust here, no sound, no echoes. This was the heart of the silence. In the center of the vast chamber, floating a few feet above the floor, was a perfect black sphere. It was a whole, in reality, a globe of absolute nothingness that did not reflect their headlamps, but drank the light, pulling it into its silent core. It was the source. The echo dot around it, the air shimmered, and in the shimmering air, faint, translucent figures flickered like faulty holograms. The lost research team. They were not ghosts. They were echoes. Perfect, silent recordings of people trapped in a perpetual loop of their last moments. "Is it?" Elias breathed, a strange calm settling over him. He had run from this, and now he was facing it. There was nowhere left to go. "Set the charge, and we get out," Jones commanded. Lena's hands flew over the nullifier's control panel. "It's armed. I have to set the dispersal pattern. I need 30 seconds after I press this button." But as she reached for the activation switch, the black sphere pulsed. A wave of pure silence, so profound it was a physical force, slammed into them. Their headlamps flickered and died. The air was driven from their lungs, and in the total, crushing darkness and silence, the echo spoke. It did not use voices or sounds. It projected pure knowledge directly into their minds. They saw the birth of galaxies and the death of stars. They saw the slow, patient crawl of geology and the frantic, meaningless scramble of life. They saw themselves, their entire existence, as a brief, chaotic flicker of noise in an infinite, eternal ocean of quiet. And they understood that the purpose of the silence was to correct this error, to smooth the chaotic ripple of consciousness back into the perfect, flat line of Nan-dash existence. It was a truth so vast and so terrible that it threatened to unmake them. Jones's men cried out, their minds shattering. Lena collapsed, her mind overloaded by the sheer, raw data. Only Elias remained standing. He had heard this song before. He had stood at the edge of this abyss in the Blackwood house. He was damaged, but his scars had given him a strange kind of immunity. "You see," the pleroma whispered, its voice now coming from the sphere, from by the mine, from inside his own head. "Peace, order, an end to the struggle. Join us. Be quiet. Elias looked at the shimmering, silent echoes of the lost team. He looked at his collapsed companions. He knew this was not peace. It was erasure. He crawled in the darkness, his hands searching for the nullifier on Lena's still form. He found the control panel, his fingers tracing the buttons he had memorized. He couldn't see. He could only feel. He found the activation switch. "It is too late," the echo whispered, its voice calm and certain. "We have already recorded you, Elias. We are already learning your shape. Soon, a perfect, quiet echo of you will walk out of this mine, and the noisy, frightened original will simply stop." Elias felt a strange sensation, a lightness, as if his memories were being gently lifted from him, copied, archived. He felt his fear, his grief, his anger, all being drained away, leaving only a hollow, peaceful emptiness. The temptation to let go, to simply cease, was overwhelming. But in that emptiness, one thing remained, a single, stubborn piece of noise, the memory of his own scream in the tunnel, the raw, animal, illogical sound of his own pain. It was not a memory, the silence. Put, understand, or replicate. It was pure, chaotic, meaningless noise. He clung to it. He flicked the final switch on the nullifier. A low hum began, a sound so alien and unwelcome in the perfect silence that it felt like a physical blow. The device was alive. "What is this?" "Discordance," the echo asked, a hint of something. That might have been confusion in its perfect voice. Elias grabbed the nullifier. It was heavy, vibrating violently. He knew he had to get it to the sphere. He stood and began to walk, one heavy step at a time, into the heart of the silent darkness. The echo fought back. It showed him images of his life, of every mistake, every regret. It showed him his own grave. It showed him a universe devoid of warmth or light. But Elias just focused on the hum of the device in his hands and the memory of his own scream. He reached the sphere. It was cold, a cold that felt like the heat death of the universe. He lifted the nullifier, its chaotic hum now, a deafening roar that was shaking the very salt of the cavern, and he thrust it into the heart of the blackness. For a moment there was a collision of absolutes, perfect silence and perfect noise. The universe seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a sound that was not a sound, but a shattering of reality itself, the sphere fractured. Cracks of pure white light spread across its black surface. The cavern groaned, the crystalline walls cracking. The silent, shimmering echoes of the lost team screamed, their voices returning to them in a final, agonizing moment of release before they dissolved into dust. The mine was coming apart. Elias felt a hand grab his arm. It was Jones, pulling him back, his face grim in the flickering, chaotic light of the dying anomaly. Time to go. They grabbed Lena and ran, the tunnel collapsing behind them. The echoes were gone, replaced by the roar of 10,000 tons of salt and rock grinding. Pay and breaking. It was the most beautiful sound Elias had ever heard. They burst out of the mine entrance into the grey light of dawn, gasping the cold, clean air as the entire hill shuddered and collapsed in on itself, sealing the Christowo Sisha forever. They were alive. They had survived. In the weeks that followed, Elias did not return to his fortress of noise. The Foundation relocated him to a quiet, isolated cottage on a windswept coast, a place of wind and waves and the cries of gulls. He was no longer a refugee. He was a veteran. He did not need the fans or the white noise anymore. The silence no longer felt empty or occupied by a predator. When he sat in the quiet, he could still feel it, the vast, deep ocean of stillness. But he was not afraid. He had walked into its heart and screamed back, "He is a changed man." The silence did not get all of him, but it got a piece. He carries a quietness inside him now, a deep, calm stillness that he did not have before. He is no longer just a man who listens to the world. He is a man the world listens to. Sometimes, when the wind dies and the waves are calm, he hears it. A faint, distant echo carried on the edge of hearing. It is the sound of his own name, but it is not a summons or a threat. It is a sign of respect, a greeting from a defeated but eternal enemy. And Elias, sitting in the quiet, simply listens and is not afraid. He knows the battle is over, for now, but he also knows that there are other quiet places in the world, other houses, other minds, and the silence has a very, very long memory.